okay. And just because it's easier for me to see the Zoom layout, I'm gonna keep it like this, like not on the presentation mode. I hope it's okay with everyone. Yeah, good. I think it's okay. All right. So like I said, this is a PowerPoint or some slides that were put together by some students last year. So I left their names here to credit them, but updated for April 5th, 2021. So this is a screenshot of what your screen will look like once you enter the AMCAS application on AMC, on the AMC website. AMCAS stands for American Medical College Application Service. So this is just the application. When I say AMCAS throughout this, I'm referring to just the application. So as you can see in this main page, you have basically 4 boxes. You have on the top left, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but on the top left, you just have some basic profile information. Bottom left, you have some general resources, some links to websites, like the AMC fee assistance programs, participating med schools and deadlines, just some links that you can click on if you need some more info. Then on the bottom right, you have document statuses. This is specifically for the transcripts and the letters of recommendation that are submitted to you. And that's just for you to track whether they've been submitted or not and like received by AMC. And then the top right box is where you'll mostly be working. This is like the biggest part of the application. And it has, I think, 8 sections, 8 or 9 sections that you.
Martina, sorry to interrupt. Are these slides going to be shared with the attendees?
Yeah, I will get permission from the students who made it last year to share it. I don't think there should be a problem though. I think we'll be able to share it. And this is all being recorded and will be uploaded as well, but I will get back to you on the slides. Thank you for that. So yeah, so we will be diving into this specific section of the application. And this is all those sections zoomed in. So you have identifying information and biographic information, which are usually pretty easy to fill out. Schools attended should also be straightforward, depending on how many colleges you've been to. Coursework, and then work and activities is probably what you'll be spending most of your time on. It can be a pretty lengthy part of the application. Then letters of evaluation, those just get submitted for you. Medical schools, those are the medical schools that you choose to send your application to. Essays, which includes the personal statement, and then standardized tests. So let's talk a little bit more about each one. Okay, so arguably the easiest part of the application is just entering this identifying and biographic info. So you have things like your legal, preferred, and alternate names, some IDs, birth and sex, address, contact, citizenship, etc. Here you can input what languages you speak and your level of fluency. Military service and discharge. Here you can indicate whether you've had any felonies or misdemeanors. There's also a disadvantaged status section, which is optional. You can, if you feel that you have been like disadvantaged in some way, either financially or socially, or otherwise, or educationally, I think is the other one, then you can check this box and then you'll be given 1,325 characters with spaces to elaborate on why you consider yourself to be disadvantaged status. And we did receive a few questions about this. It's pretty broad, and I think it's that way on purpose. They give you space to, if you feel that you've been disadvantaged, like I said, economically, academically, or socially, then they give you a little bit of space for you to elaborate on that. So, pretty open to interpretation. And then just some information about your family, your parents, some siblings, your siblings, and then some dependents if you have any. Okay. So this can be either very straightforward or a little tricky. Here you're just inputting, in this section, you're inputting like what schools you've attended, and you do need a transcript from each school that you input here. So I believe this includes high school. I actually don't remember that, but high school, community college, even community college classes that you might have taken during high school, your undergrad, if you've been to multiple, like if you transferred, then each one, I think you need a transcript from, list your majors and minors. And this also includes study abroad, summer program, and military education courses. And I don't think this is very common, but if you have matriculated to a medical school before, then you need to indicate that you have, and then you will get another 1,325 character space to explain like what happened, like what the situation there is. I don't know if that includes medical schools abroad. I want to say that it's just medical schools in the US, but we would have to check and see. And then lastly, if you have any institutional actions, you will also just check this box, and then you'll be given another little space to elaborate on what happened. Okay. So transcripts. So yeah, full disclosure, I was not a UCLA undergrad, so I didn't go through this very specific process, but our panelists, actually all three of them here are UCLA alum. So they say it's pretty straightforward. I hope these screenshots help. If if you've never requested official transcripts for anything before, I hope these screenshots can help you navigate that. It seems like you can get these online through My UCLA under classes, transcripts, order official. It has to be an official transcript. And then you'll just have that transcript sent to AMCAS. I believe in the application, they tell you like what address or whatever to use. Yes, and then do this ahead of time because I think this is just like across all schools. Sometimes the registrar's office can get backed up, so it might take a little while for the official transcripts to make it to AMC. So just try to do that as soon as possible, and do it even if you're still taking classes and like you still have a few more to go. Like let's say you're applying in the spring. Oh, but you guys do quarters. So that's even more. I don't even know quarters.
I can speak a little bit
Okay.
about it. Yeah, so for most people, if you don't want to delay your application, I would recommend you submit your transcripts without your spring quarter grades, and that's completely okay. It'll just be in progress on the application. Just some notes about the dates. You should be able to start submitting transcripts as early as May 3rd or May 1st, I believe, when the AMCAS opens. And I also highly encourage y'all to submit your transcripts early on because you don't want that to delay your application to processing. That being said, UCLA, if that's your only school, you don't have to rush it because it's online transcripts, so it's delivered pretty quickly. And what you'll do is basically as soon as AMCAS opens, you can like start the application and you'll have an AMCAS ID, and you'll just enter that ID when you request for the transcripts. There should be like an indicated box for you to enter your ID, and the school will be able to send it directly to AMCAS, and they'll be able to file it under your application ID. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Holly. And then I was corrected. So I think you do list your high school in schools attended, but you don't need a transcript from your high school. I hope that's correct. Yes. Okay, so yeah, transcripts and then coursework. This is something that will also, like vary slightly from college to college. Like you can definitely get help from maybe older students that who have already applied and taken a lot of the same classes that you're taking or have taken. And then you can just ask them like how specifically they inputted different classes. But basically you'll be inputting the school name. So the school, like where you took that class, your status, so like freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, what year, term or quarter, what class it was. They have like codes, the course number, the course name, hours, semester hours. I'm assuming there's some sort of conversion there, and then your grade. So make sure you enter your course name as it appears on the transcript and in chronological order. And you can do this with the help of your unofficial transcript, which I'm assuming you can just download from My UCLA. And then, yes, grades can be left blank for courses in progress. And I think there's somewhere for you to indicate that it's in progress. And it's totally okay to apply without finishing some classes. You can actually, this is like kind of off topic, but in the future, like deeper into your application cycle, you can actually send like updates to some of the schools that you've applied to. And I think grades are totally acceptable. Like new grades that you've gotten since you've submitted the application are totally acceptable to send to schools as like an update. Like I just got all A's on my last quarter. So yeah, do panelists, do you guys want to add anything else to coursework or?
I'll just add that
Wait.
looking at my application, I don't even have any numbers for hours, so that one for me is blank.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I'm trying to answer questions Q&A, but I'm not sure if you mentioned this, Martina. But sometimes it's difficult when you're trying to list what classes fall into which category, and y'all know that there's like this like BCPM GPA, and there's this like all the other things GPA, and sometimes how you list courses will affect your GPA for one or the other. So don't worry if you're really unsure how to list it, but generally if you feel like you did a lot of it's hard. There's a guide that AMC has that you can use to help you, but worst case scenario, during the verification process, they'll just correct it to the correct category. But I would just like go with like what you believe the class should be under. So, for example, I took a biomedical ethics class, MCDB 60, and even though it's in the MCDB category, but it was like very ethics and a lot of writing involved, so I didn't list it under like the BCPM category.
Yeah, and then, we'll just have to also defer to like your pre-health office. I'm sure they have a lot of experience helping students put in all the courses offered at UCLA. So I'm sure they can help you with that. And then, so with the application, I have to admit, I'm a little fuzzy on the details, even though it was just a year ago. I believe, well, actually, I have a timeline at the end of the presentation, but basically one of the first things that's going to happen with your application is that you're going to fill in this coursework and then submit it for grade verification. So they'll just, I'm assuming, compare it. They'll just make sure that everything was entered correctly, all the categories are correct. I'm assuming they compare it to your official transcript. We can get more into this towards the end when I have the timeline on the screen, but grade verification will be one of the first things that happens to your application. It'll happen even before you submit like the final thing. It'll come back and you'll still work on it. Okay.
Sorry. So just I think there's a couple of questions regarding when to request transcript. You don't have to do it right away, but AMCAS need to receive it for them to verify your applications, and the more delay it is, the later your application will be verified. So for that reasons, you need to. So it is in your best interest to ask for a transcript very early on, like let's say May, so they can get sent out pretty early, and then when you submit your applications, AMCAS can start the verification process right away. Just to reiterate, if you take community classes, you have to submit the transcript from those community college. So for example, I took one class at West LA, that I actually have to go to West LA, submit a paper form to get it sent to AMCAS.
Yeah, I had a lot of people I knew had to do something similar, had to go hunt down their like community college they did in high school. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. So next we have the work and activity section. And like I said, this is more like a more involved section. So for those who are not familiar, on the AMCAS application, you have 15 entries where with 700 characters each, where you can put one activity or experience or work, or you'll see when I show you the categories, you'll see what I'm talking about. You can put one of these per like in each spot. So you can have a maximum of 15 experiences. I'm just going to call them experiences. So there's 18 categories, which includes clinical experience, volunteering, employment, research, etc. And then it'll look something like this. So what I have on the right here, you'll have to input what type of experience it is. So you'll choose one out of these 18 categories, which I have on the next slide, all of the categories. You give it a name like tutoring or general chemistry tutoring. Then you put your start date, end date, and how many hours you participated in this experience or activity. repeated, I think that just means like if this was something that you did like once a year or every other month or something that's like recurring, it'll just change this start and end date format a little bit. And then you can put in like an organization name. So if this activity was associated with any particular organization, you can include that there. Country, city where this happened, and then a contact title is just someone who can basically vouch for you, that you were there, that your hours seem accurate, that your role, like they can basically verify that you were there and you did what you are saying you did. And schools can technically reach out to any of your contacts at any point to verify. But from my understanding, this doesn't happen very often. So it's okay if you can't find like a very good contact for an activity you did, like if it was a long time ago, or if it was like your contact would be another student, like if you would want to put like, I don't even know. I'm blanking on like a specific activity or a specific example right now, but basically what I'm saying is try your best to get a contact in there, knowing that it is very possible for them to reach out to that contact, but not very likely. So don't like lose too much sleep over who your contact person is. So these 18 categories are all listed here, and they include, artistic endeavors. There's clinical and non-clinical community service / volunteer. And there's also clinical and non-clinical paid employment. So like medical job and then just any other job that's not medical. Those are separate categories. Then you also have things like conferences attended and presentations and posters, publications, research / lab, teaching, tutoring, teaching assistant, physician shadowing, which I think that's like one experience that kind of everyone should have. Hobbies, which can literally just mean hobbies, like anything, like gardening, painting, cooking, singing. I think med schools like to see hobbies. Honors, awards, recognitions, that can include like scholarships and just things you've, been awarded. Yeah, extracurriculars, I think military service, yeah, leadership, intercollegiate athletics. And so for some of these, this is what it looks like. So for some of these, you can lump them into one activity, like one experience. So like, let's say you have multiple publications, you could just have one entry like this, and then in the description, you'll just be able to like list the publications. Or same thing with conferences. If you presented at multiple conferences, you don't have to have one experience per conference. You can just have one experience called conferences, and then just list all the conferences you went to, etc. You could even do this with shadowing. I did this with shadowing. I had one shadowing entry, and then I just listed my different shadowing experiences in the description section. And so this is what it'll look like. It can get kind of confusing with all the boxes, but basically this is just like information. Oh, can you guys see my cursor?
Yeah, but they'll see real examples of this later. So
yes,
this part's not really that useful.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. So Brandon very kindly offered to share some screenshots of his actual application without these black boxes. So I'm just going to go through this super fast. As you can see, there's experience type, name, contact, et cetera, et cetera. And then this box is supposed to be your description for your activity. And then one other thing is that of those max 15, 3 of them can be your most meaningful experiences. And basically you will just check yes to this is one of my most meaningful experiences. And what will happen is that you'll have an additional box here that gives you an additional 1,325 characters with spaces to elaborate on why that is a meaningful experience to you. I mean, they're all meaningful, but like most meaningful. So you have the approximately 700 characters for the description, and then an additional 1,325 characters to elaborate a little more on up to 3 activities that you designate as most meaningful. Okay, so this is our first question for our panelists. How did you choose which work and activities you included, and then how did you start to write them or write about them?
I guess I can start. So I think first I'd have to say that you don't have to fill out all 15. Let's put it out there. But for multiple reasons, you realize that sometimes you actually need to cut back because you just have done a lot more than you have thought as pre-med. Immediately we try a lot as a pre-med, so then like you just start filling out and it's like, wow, I have too many. So what is important is that you just have to think about a theme of what you want to portray yourself as a candidate. So do you want to be someone who is into research or into teaching or into community services and then things like that? So for me, I think I was portraying myself as more of a research oriented towards a teaching career. So then I decided to cut back on the activities I don't do as much. Like, for example, if I play sports or I do anything as a hobby, I just don't mention any of that because I just like put a lot of my research activities in and then 1 or 2 of my teaching work experience. So that was how I choose what to write about.
Yeah, so my approach was I had a working like CV or resume that I kept like track of all my activities throughout college. So I already had a list of like all the activities and things that I had done. So I looked at all categories, the 18 categories, and I kind of categorized what all of my activities fell into. That was the first step that I did. And then second step was kind of decide what were my 3 most meaningful activities. And those will be pretty easy for you to come up with because if they were the most meaningful, you know, you put a lot of time and energy into those. And, you know, you may have more than 15, you may have less than 15. Honestly, the number doesn't really matter. We get that question a lot. Like, it really does not matter how many activities that you put. And yeah, so like if I had, for example, a lot of like conferences or posters, I wasn't gonna take up an activity to list like 2 or 3 different conferences or posters that I went to. I just created one activity called conferences and posters and listed all of those in that activity. So you don't wanna like, let's say you only have like 10, only quote unquote, have like 10 activities. You don't wanna just like list all your posters as a separate activity just to fill it up so you hit 15 activities. Like that, I don't think is a good idea. Just, yeah.
Yeah, I had a similar approach as Brandon, where I had kind of a list of activities that I was doing already. And then a lot of thought was put into like how I should combine certain activities and how I should categorize certain activities. I would try to kind of spread out the categories so that so a lot of the categories, a lot of your experiences can fall under multiple categories. So it's up to you to list it, but you can only list it under one category. So let's say you're doing community service and you're also a leader for this community service work, which is very common. You can decide whether you want to list it as community service or leadership after judging whether you have a lot of other community service experience that you can list as such, or you have other leadership experience you can list as such. So you would just kind of use it to your advantage. And otherwise, in my working activities, I'll just kind of talk about how I wrote it. Since I've read a lot of working activities for my mentees, and a lot of them when they begin, and I also made the same mistake, I would just like list it out what I did, kind of like a resume. And I would actually suggest you to like even make working activities more like a narrative, like kind of talk about your motivation for doing this, talk about what you did, and talk about what you learned, or how you progressed during your experience, what you started out as, and then how you progressed during it, and what you ended up as, and why you did what you did. Since like obviously they make this like a narrative form, they could have just have you list out bullet points of what you did, right? But no, they give you a character amount for you to write sentences. So kind of make it as engaging as possible is like my #1 advice for the work and activity section.
Yeah, I would say, sorry, just to bounce off that idea, like make your writing throughout your application super, super clear, right? Like whatever you want your readers to know is exactly what you should type out on the application, because your readers are going to go through a ton of these applications. They're going to read through your application really fast. So really be like very specific and concise. What you want them to know is what you're going to write.
Yeah, 100% agree with what Brandon just said. In particular, it is super, super important for whatever you write to just be clear and easy to read. And I think a lot of people feel like maybe they want to make things sound more artistic, like more like a story, but the reality is that that just makes it harder for, like some application reviewers to read your application. Like Brandon said, they're going through literally hundreds, if not thousands of applications in the span of a few weeks sometimes. And if they get, like kind of like slowed down by maybe like some art, like metaphors and all this other stuff, they're just gonna like be a little frustrating. So just clarity is super key. Yeah, I think your application reviewer will be very happy if they can just like skim through what you just wrote and then have a good picture of, like what information you wanted to convey. So that's actually also super relevant to the personal statement, which we can talk a little bit more about in a bit. Holly, did you have something else to add?
Yeah. Just a couple more points. Don't feel the need to want to connect every activity to medicine, and you never have to like explicitly state like this will make me a great physician because blah blah blah. You just want to convey through a narrative what your characteristics are and how you're unique and how you can be a good doctor in the future. So that's one thing. Another thing I think was also in the Q&A. Is I wanted to mention, and this is something I didn't know, and it's that you can project activities that you'll be doing during your gap year. So if you are already doing something that you'll be continuing, you actually can like project the end date and the number of hours that you estimated you would have on your application. And if you, let's say, know what your gap year job will be, if the start date is before you submit your application, then you can put it on your application and project it to whenever you anticipate you will be working until. And you will just estimate the number of hours that you'll be putting into the activity.
Yeah, 100%. I did that too for my gap year. I put the projected time instead of just like the date we submitted. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and move on. Clearly, the work and activities section is a very loaded topic that we could dedicate an entire other panel to. But for today's sake, we'll just move on to the next section. And that would be letters of evaluation. So most schools, different medical schools will have different requirements for this. The majority of them, at a minimum, will require 2 letters of rec from science professors and 1 letter of rec from like a humanities or a sociology professor. Look at each individual school's requirements for any exceptions. And I think there is a cap. So most schools, I don't know if there's a cap. Most schools will allow up to 5 or 6 letters of rec, but if you can, like somehow get like 10 plus letters of rec, I don't know if 10 letters of rec will necessarily be like a good thing. Maybe try to like choose the strongest letters you have that meet the requirements that these schools have, and then just kind of go with those. Because like I said, these reviewers, admissions committee members, they have a lot of applications to go through. And if each person submitted like 12 letters of rec, that would be very overwhelming. So try to choose your stronger letters and then just kind of go with those, making sure that you're meeting the minimum requirements. And actually in our last session, we had a panelist say that she reached out to schools to ask them how flexible they were with their minimum requirements. And it seems like some schools are even flexible with that. So like if you can't get a letter of rec from a humanities professor, reach out directly to the schools and then see, what they're willing to kind of be flexible with and navigate. So that's just like a tip in case you're like very kind of like you can't get a specific letter. But yeah, we have done entire panels on letters of rec, letters like thank you letters of everything. So if you want a little more info on that, you should have that up on our Instagram and other social media. So panelists, I guess we will be stopping here for a little bit. Who, when, and how did you ask for letters of rec?
I'll defer to the other two first because mine was a little weird.
I can go as well. So I have 5 total. I only asked one person by email though, because the other 4 I kind of work with them throughout. So it's my research PI, and then my I was a TA, so I worked with the instructors. So I just like come up to their office and just ask them in person, which I find a lot easier and nicer. So that's how. When is I asked, I think around April, but I think it was easier for me just because I was in engineering school. So then like they don't really have to worry too much about medical school. People try to ask them for letters compared to, let's say, biology, which you can imagine. I think I heard someone has like 70 letter requests by like March. So you should definitely ask early for if you're in that camp. And I have 5. So I have 1 from my clinical volunteer experience. 1 is from, it's a class from public health, I think. 1 math course, which I took, and then a TA for that person's. 1 from my research PI, who I also took classes with, and then 1 person who I just volunteered with for a longest time, and it has nothing to do with medicine. So that works out.
For me, I think I started thinking about who I'll ask like in January of the year I'm applying. I don't exactly remember when I started asking them, but it wasn't all at once. Like it's kind of scattered. Like, okay, I guess I'll ask you, or another 2 weeks after, like, oh, okay, I guess I'll ask you too. Unlike Nguyen, I asked a lot of them through email, except for the professors that I like currently still had classes with. For example, I asked for a science letter from my community college professor, and he was very responsive and was very happy to do it. And now in the age of Zoom, I'm sure most of you will have to ask over email, but you can always request to have a Zoom meeting with the professor so you can kind of get to know your professor better and talk to them about what you would like them to, not explicitly, but kind of guide them towards what you would like them to write about on your letters. And I had many letters. I think I had 7 letters, but I didn't send all the letters to all the schools. And for some letters, I sent it to very few schools. And my like tactic was that I'll ask the person, and if the person says yes, I kind of gauge how enthusiastic they are in writing the letter for me. And ultimately, when they submit it through Interfolio, you can see how many pages they've written. So when I saw that one person only wrote a page, and I think like I don't know if this is sound advice, but like the general rule of thumb is to write like 2 pages. I thought that maybe I'll just submit this letter to like just a few schools that require more letters. That's how I went about it. Again, you can just store the letters and decide whether to send it to schools when applicable. And for different schools with different missions, I would kind of think about which letters to send, whether I should send more academic oriented letters or more like community service oriented or works oriented. And then one more thing I wanted to touch on is that a lot of you are probably in organizations that don't allow you to interact with the advisor directly. That's very common, and it was the case for me as well. But for my org that I was in, they had this formal letter request process where you'll fill out a form and you'll indicate like what are some things that you've accomplished through this org and things that you want to highlight. And I think the advisor's assistant will write it up and the advisor will sign it and they'll submit it for you. So it's like maybe perhaps not as personal, but since you are the person who is requesting and writing up that form, you can make it more personal by like the way you request for that letter. So just to kind of put in some peace of mind in those of you who are sweating about like not being able to personally connect with your extracurricular advisors.
Yeah, so I'll only add Interfolio, use it. I'm not even going to say I recommend it. I'm telling you now just to use it to collect and store your letters because it integrates seamlessly with the AMCAS. Also, the people that you ask for letters, you should have like a pretty good relationship with. Those will be their strongest letters, and it's totally appropriate for you to kind of guide where the letter or what the letter is trying to like say about you, right? So for me, I was super close to like some of the other panelists. I had more letters stored in Interfolio than I actually submitted. And the way that I decided on which ones to submit were that the professors that I actually sat down with and kind of described to them what I wanted them to emphasize were ultimately the letters that I ended up submitting, because I didn't want my letters to overlap and all saying the same things about me. So I wanted, like, for example, my research letters to talk more about like my independence as a researcher, and then like some other letters talking about like all that other stuff. So if you can, you know, try to guide what your letters of rec will say about you. Also, I would say that a mediocre letter is probably more damaging than no letter at all. Again, so you don't want to submit too many letters because you're going to bore your reader. And then also if it's a mediocre letter, like no school wants like a mediocre med student, right? They want like all the best applicants. So, you know, be very mindful about which letters who you ask for letters and which letters you submit. I ended up applying to med school without a humanities letter because I decided very late. I decided senior year to be pre-med and apply to medical school. And by then I had taken all my humanities classes, and I told myself, hey, like any old humanities professor that I asked would not write a strong letter. So I just applied without one, and it worked out. So I don't know. If you can, don't take that risk, but that's kind of my position.
Yeah, that's something I want to mention too. Each school will have a requirement, but I put in quotation marks because like that's not really a requirement. They're not going to screen you out if they realize that this professor is not a certain person for most schools that I believe. So especially if y'all are like non-trad and it's been years since you were in school, I wouldn't sweat too much about it. Just do the best you can for this part. And then one more thing I want to mention is that when you're applying through AMCAS, you'll realize that some people use this thing called like the AMCAS letter service. I don't recommend using it, not because it's bad or anything. I have no experience with it, but the thing is that you can't start using it until AMCAS opens on May, meaning that your professors cannot submit before May starts. So Interfolio is better because they can just store it, and storing your letters is completely free. But sending it out costs, I think like $49 or $50 for a year's worth of unlimited sending or something like that. So just to keep that in mind.
Perfect. Thank you for all your advice. Again, in the interest of time, I think I'm gonna move on, but we do, like I said, have a whole Med Mentors already recorded about letters of rec. So if you're in that stage, you're trying to ask professors, definitely refer to that for more info. Okay, so the medical school section is also pretty straightforward. You have to select at least one medical school in order to submit your application for for grade verification, which is, like I said, the very first step, the very first thing that will happen to your application. Most MD schools use AMCAS. I think there's a few, maybe Texas, that don't. So just make sure that the schools you want to apply to are on AMCAS. Chances are they will be. And then, yeah, you can usually most people will have an idea of what schools they want to apply to even before they start their application. But if you're still in that stage where you're looking for medical schools, you can actually search. You can use the MSAR, which stands for Medical Student something registration accepted admittance. I don't remember. MSAR, and that basically shows the breakdown for each school of what MCAT, what GPA, you know, what extracurriculars, median age, things like that, like stats basically on the students that were accepted and then matriculated to each school. So you can kind of gauge, you know, like what schools are maybe a good idea for you to apply to. And then you can also just choose based on things like location, you know, personal things. So yeah, pretty straightforward choosing medical schools. Okay, so the essays. This is where you'll have the personal statement section, and it's 5,300 characters with spaces. And honestly, it's so like plain and simple that it's almost intimidating. All it says is exactly what you see here. It just says, use the space provided to explain why you want to go to medical school. That's it. And I know a lot of people, like, we get a ton of questions about personal statement. A lot of people have questions about how to write it, what to write about. Honestly, I've heard a lot of advice. Like, I heard a lot of advice as a pre-med, but the advice that kind of made the most sense to me and that stuck with me was that it's very hard to write like an incredible personal statement that's going to make someone want to interview on the spot. Like, realistically speaking, that's not super likely to happen. But what is super easy to happen is that you have a bad personal statement that will make someone not want to continue reading your application. And by bad, I mean not clear, like we were talking about before. It's too confusing, it's too hard to read, it has too many grammatical and spelling errors, it's offensive. You know, you want to try to stay as neutral and not like offensive and not negative in your personal statement for the most part as possible, just because you don't know who's going to be reading your personal statement, and the last thing you want to do is offend the reader and have them just toss your application basically. So I think a good personal statement will A, be clear and easy to read, and B, answer the question, which is why you want to go to medical school. And then you can answer that question by sort of telling your story, you know, telling your, like, what motivated you, what inspired you, what were some key experiences that you had that made you realize that this was the path for you. And yeah, again, personal statement is a massive topic that could be its own thing. So for today's session, we're going to try to keep it pretty brief. And then one last note, if you are applying to MD PhD programs, in this section, you'll have 2 additional essays. One is the Why MD PhD essay, where you explain why both and not one or the other. And then the other will be the Significant Research Experiences essay, which has like 10,000 character limit. It's like massive. You can basically write a lot about your research experiences and what you learn, things like that. But again, a topic for another day. Okay, so we are running kind of short on time. So panelists, if you want to just quickly talk about like, how did you start brainstorming your personal statement, and like, how did that process start out for you?
I'll just start by saying I was an MD PhD applicant, so my personal statement is kind of different. So I'll defer to the other panelists.
A lot of writing and rewriting, and ultimately what helped me the most was just kind of thought dumping to my roommate, who was practically taking notes. Bless her. And she organized the notes afterward in like a very clear format that helped me clearly see like a storyline or progression. And besides that, I would recommend you just thought dumping everything that kind of steers you towards medicine, whether that's like formal experiences that you're listing on work-in activities, or just like simple encounters you have in life or family experience. Anything that you can think of, write it down, and then kind of think about which ones are very important to you and how that inform your decision to apply to medical school.
Yeah, just remember that the personal statement is just one part of your application. People might have different opinions on this, so take mine with a grain of salt, but I think the personal statement is like, it's not what's going to get you in. It's just something that needs to be like good so that they can move on to the rest of your application. Yeah, that's just me. I don't know. That's the advice that I got, that I stuck with, that worked for me. I just kept it simple, to the point, nothing like inflammatory, offensive, and then just, yeah, it's just one part of your application. Okay. So then is your standardized test. This is also a pretty straightforward section. You're just going to be you're just going to be inputting your MCAT scores, and this is what it'll look like in your final application. This is probably not correct because I don't remember changing this. So reports all MCAT exams after maybe 2004 that were not voided. You do not need to list exams that you voided and therefore did not get scored. And then I guess there's some programs that might require additional tests like the LSAT and GRE. So if that's necessary and if you have those scores, there will be a section for you to input those as well. Okay, so once you've gone through all these sections, you've gotten your letters, your transcripts. Oh, Holly, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just a few notes. Some people are asking and are wondering about the timeline for when they take their MCAT if they haven't taken it already. The advice that I would give is that you have to realize that your MCAT scores take about a month to get back to you, and MCAT, at least to me, will inform me like the types of schools that I would apply to, or the list of schools that I would apply to. So ideally, I would want to take my MCAT by April so that I have my score back by May, so that I can finalize my school list and submit at the end of May and early June. So that's just like the ideal timeline. I know that's like life happens and it's hard. And I think I'm not sure. I think this is true, but you don't have to submit your primaries with an MCAT score. You can always add it later. So the thing that takes the most amount of time is the verification process, where AMC is verifying your grades that you input into your application. So if your MCAT scores come back a little later, that's okay. I will still submit your primary and get it out of the way and get it into the verification pipeline while you wait, and then you can always add schools later as well. So just click one school, submit it to AMCAS, and you can add all the other schools later after your MCAS score comes back.
Yeah, that's a very good point that I forgot to mention back when we were in the medical school section, that you can add additional schools at basically any point in the cycle. And it's pretty easy. You just go back to your application and then you add additional schools. And it's pretty straightforward, but it can be done. Okay. So yeah, so once you've filled in all these sections, you have all your letters, your transcripts ready to go, you just hit submit application, and it'll feel very scary, but very awesome at the same time. Like, it's out of your hands now. Oh, actually, I guess not yet. So first, your application has to be verified. Your transcripts have to be verified. And then the AMCAS on the homepage, they'll have like updates like, oh, we're currently verifying people who submitted on these dates, or now we're verifying people who submitted on these dates. So the sooner you submit your application, the quicker the turnaround time will be. But if you wait till later, they might take like weeks to verify your application. So you don't want that to hold you up. So your app will be verified, and then you'll be able to send it to schools. And then you'll be getting secondaries back from most schools. And then this is also another topic of discussion, is like, how quickly should I return secondaries to schools? Basically, as soon as you can, with the best quality that you can. I personally tried to submit them within 2 weeks to a month. I think a month was the longest I took for one of them, and that's because it was a very long secondary. Yeah, just try to get that in as quickly as you can. So these are the dates for this year. The AMCAS application opens on May 3rd. The submission opens on May 27th. So I think you can basically, what May 3rd means is that that's when you can, make an account and then start filling out the application. And then on the 27th is when you can hit submit for your transcript to be verified, like for your grades to be verified. And then throughout this whole time, you can continue working on your application. I don't think you need to have it ready just for your grades to be verified, but you can continue working on your application. And then June 25th is the first day that AMCAS will send out your application to schools. So it'll be the first date that schools will start seeing applications. And then each school will have their own submission deadline for the primary application, this application that we've been talking about. So definitely make sure that you're not like passing those. And then, okay, so we have the examples from Brandon, and then these were the additional Q&A that we were going to try to go through. So I think people might be more interested in seeing an example. So Brandon, if you want to take it away in these
Yeah,
last
I'll
minutes.
make this super quick. So I have one. So this first example is one with a meaning that I marked as one of my 3 meaningful experiences. So as you can see, I have 2 description paragraphs on this activity that's called City Lab. So in the experience name, I listed the name of City Lab, which is the organization that I was involved in at UCLA. But I also kind of added a description at the end of it because no one reading the application is going to know what the hell City Lab means, right? So I wrote, it's a science educational outreach program. Okay, blah, 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 list the contact, email, blah, 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 dates, hours, whatever. So then the experience description, I described exactly what City Lab was. It's a science educational outreach program, blah, blah, blah. Just described it a little bit. And then this is kind of where I put any of like leadership positions. So the last sentence I say, as the laboratory director in 2017, I set up and managed experiments performed by students. So it's a great place to list your leadership within the activity. Or there's another activities category where you can list all your leaderships there. So I listed all my leadership within each individual activity. Oh yeah, so the next one, the next experience is leadership. The category is leadership not listed elsewhere. And here I described how I was an editor and then editor-in-chief of the undergraduate science journal at UCLA. And this one, the description is very straightforward. This is a science journal, and these were my leadership positions, and that was it. This will be shared, so we don't have to read them now. And then the next example is shadowing, which I feel like I thought a lot of people could benefit from. So here I just listed shadowing. My contact is the doctor that I shadowed. I only had 15 hours of shadowing. Again, I decided to be a medical student very late in my college career. But then in this description, I don't really have to describe what shadowing is, right? Like, so everyone knows what shadowing is. So in this description, instead of describing shadowing, I described why shadowing was meaningful, was like a significant experience for me. So I said, oh, I ended up meeting patients that were experiencing and suffering from the same diseases that I was studying in my research lab. So that added a new perspective to the research that I was doing. So that's what I listed as the description. So the description for your different activities can be very literal, like this is what the activity is, or it could be more of a personal thing. And it kind of varies from activity to activity.
Yes, and I think it's more impactful if, like we've said before, if you can, instead of just like show not tell, like don't say I learned, like I practiced having I had a leadership position because, and I was able to practice this, like just like say like, I was in charge of this, or I was overseeing this, and that taught me, like better communication skills, better time management, et cetera, et cetera. So show not tell, while being clear. But yeah, thank you so much for these examples, Brandon. We have about 5 minutes left. I don't know if the webinar will automatically shut down at 7. It might. So maybe, what do you all think? Is there any one of these questions that kind of stands out that you might want to comment on? We talked about some of these.
Really quickly for number 1, yes, you can mention any of your activities in any of the essays that you end up writing. It would be hard to write any of your essays not mentioning any of your activities, in my opinion.
Yeah, but don't treat the personal statement as just like relisting all 15 activities or however many activities you have. Yeah, don't just like list, I did this, I did this, I did this. Like try to enter why medicine. Are submitted under review manuscripts okay to list on the app? 100% yes. This is similar to like the grades. You can definitely put that you have a manuscript under submission or under review, and then you can update schools later on in the application cycle. Maybe you're hoping to hear back from a school and you kind of want to stay in touch with them. You can update them with either grades or say, hey, my publication was accepted or this was published. So you definitely don't have to have things like finalized and ready on your application. What do you all think? Did any of you have non-clinical jobs on your application?
I mean, I worked as a researcher.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think those are definitely good to include. They have a category specifically for this, which indicates that it's like good to talk about. There's definitely like transferable job skills. So you don't have to relate everything to medicine, but you know, if you were like in customer service or you had to interact with people, you had to like deal with people who were upset, these are all very transferable and relevant skills that you develop. So I think it's 100%. And you know, it also shows it's hard to take classes and to work 1 or 2 full-time jobs. You know, that's really admirable and impressive. So definitely something you want to bring up. If that took a significant amount of your time, you should talk about it on your application.
Yeah, and just a lot of these questions, we already have like full hour-long panels discussing in a lot of detail. For example, how to construct a school list. We have a panel on that. Personal statements, we got a panel. Yeah.
Yeah, just some notes on secondaries, since I see some questions in the Q&A about it. Secondaries is a lot. What happens is basically when AMCAS sends your application to each school will decide whether to release a secondary application to you through a specific link for each school. So if you decide to apply to 30 schools, you're going to get 30 links that you'll need to complete. Some of the schools will require you to have to manually type in your grades all over again, and do all those things that are already on the primary app, but you just have to roll with it and you have to just give them the information that they're asking for. There are secondary banks you can find online, and secondary questions usually don't change year to year. So you can definitely pre-write your secondaries as soon as you submitted your primary app. And yeah, so some things that they ask for, besides the bank, the questions, I think they ask for whether you speak other languages. There's just so many different things for different schools, and you'll just have to kind of fill out each link for each school.
All right. Okay. So we are at time. Thank you all so much, well, to you lovely panelists for being here, for taking an hour out of your super busy day to help answer all these incredible questions that we've gotten. And then thank you to all of you here attending, listening, and then to everyone who submitted questions for us on the RSVP form. They're very helpful to guide us and what you guys want to see and hear. So with that, I think I will go ahead and end the recording. I don't know what's going to happen to this webinar in a minute, but yeah, thank you all so much for being here. And we will not be having one of these next week because we have finals. We will have one, I think, the following week. So just stay tuned. We'll advertise them as they come up. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. Oh, and if we didn't get to your question, we have the ask the, if you're a UCLA student, you can always submit your question to our Ask a Med Student form, which we always link in our emails. So send in your questions there and we'll try to get to them. Okay, bye.